Hello, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, which is nobody in this room, my name is Yassine Eldeek. I am one of the 2016 class marshals. On behalf of your entire class marshals of 2016, we welcome you to our last lecture series. Woo! So, I will now move forward with introducing my friend, Bob Bordone, who was educated at Dartmouth College, where he majored in government. He then went on to graduate from Harvard Law School, where, while he was here, to no surprise, focused his coursework on negotiation, mediation, and dispute resolution. After law school, Bob clerked for the Honorable George A. O'Toole, Jr. for the United States District Court for Massachusetts. He is the Thaddeus R. Beal Clinical Professor of Law here at Harvard Law School and the founding director of the Harvard Negotiation and Mediation Clinical Program. In 2007, Bob received the Albert Sachs Paul Freund Teaching Award at Harvard Law School, which is presented annually to a member of our faculty for teaching excellence, mentorship of students, and general contributions to the life of the law school. In 2010, the International Institute for Conflict Prevention and Resolution awarded Bob its Problem Solving in the Law School Curriculum Award for his innovative work in creating and building the Harvard Negotiation and Mediation Clinical Program. The Handbook of Dispute Resolution, a book which Bob co-authored, was awarded the 2005 Book Award from the National Institute for Advanced Conflict Resolution, awarded to a book published in the United States that shows the best promise of promoting and contributing to the field of conflict resolution. His writing and commentary have appeared in various print and broadcast media outlets, including the Boston Globe, the Washington Post, the LA Times, Chicago Tribune, CNN Situation Room, and BBC Radio. Bob specializes in dispute systems design and in assisting individuals and groups seeking to manage conflicts in highly sensitive, emotional, or difficult situations, like Yassine's 1L crisis. His corporate clients have included Gap Inc., Fidelity Investments, Nestle, Coca-Cola, Microsoft. He's also worked on projects with nonprofit, educational, governmental, and cultural institutions such as the Boston Symphony Orchestra, Massachusetts General Hospital, the U.S. Department of Justice, the International Criminal Court at The Hague, and Seeds of Peace. It is with great pleasure that I introduce to you one of my dearest mentors here at Harvard Law School, Bob Bordone.
Thank you, Yassine. Thank you. Thanks for that great introduction, Yassine. And I just want to let everyone know, by long-standing agreement, we are not going to be talking about Yassine's 2L and 3L crises, which were handled on a confidential basis. Thank you really very, very much. And thanks to the class committee and all of you for being here on this incredibly gorgeous day and Marathon Monday. So for you to be here is actually a huge honor for me. Over the last few days, I've been thinking, actually I've been feeling quite burdened, honored but burdened, because I really wanted to say something to all of you that would be profound or original or something that you hadn't heard before. But then in negotiation, we have this term called action-forcing event. In ordinary terms, that's called a looming deadline. And as the looming deadline approached, I did what I think many of us do when we are in a panic. I started to read status updates of my Facebook friends, because that's what you do when you're in a panic. And then when I was done with that, I started to review some of my own past Facebook status updates. And as I was scrolling backward in my life history on Facebook, I stumbled on a post from a few years ago. And the post simply said, "Best job ever." And when I saw that, I thought, oh my gosh, now I know what I want to do. So I want to tell you about when I posted this, which was January 19th, 2013, at about 2:30 in the morning. But we're going to start January 18th, 2013, at about 7 a.m., when I woke up in a cold stone dormitory in a small institute that was owned by the Vatican and situated on a lonely hill in East Jerusalem. And I was accompanied by 2 other HLS colleagues. And so from our vantage point, we were kind of on a little hill, and so you could see, we're in mostly Palestinian East Jerusalem, but you could actually see the separation barrier or the wall or the fence or whatever you call it that divides Jerusalem from the West Bank. And you could see some Israeli settlements being built, and you could see the checkpoint that goes into Bethlehem. And so for a conflict resolution person, it's really surreal to be in this place physically. And I woke up, and we would be spending our second intense day working with 36 Israeli and Palestinian teenagers who'd come together to learn about negotiation and learn about conflict resolution. So now we could fast forward to about 2:30 in the morning on January 19th. And it was a day of intense teaching that led to some pretty fraught conversations between Israelis and Palestinians. So in the evening, the counselors had set up some dance party for these kids. But instead of participating in the dance party, some of them decided to practice some of the skills they had learned that day by doing an active listening dialogue with each other. Except late into the evening, the predictable, maybe inevitable happened. There was a meltdown. And there were tears and separation and isolation and breakdown. And so by the time we were done mediating, listening, consoling, being present, and then we had to prepare for day 3, it's 2:30 in the morning. I get into my room, my little cold dorm room, fire up my computer, and post best job ever. And now you are probably thinking, why did our class committee invite this raving lunatic to give this talk today? So it's a good question, but I at least want to ask you to hold your judgment and maybe just suggest that I'm not a raving lunatic, because I actually do have the best job ever for me. And I'd really like to encourage all of you to try to find a job like that for you. And for those of you who have taken the negotiation workshop in the spring, you know that the whole course is based on this framework that's called the 7 elements of negotiation success. And so what I want to share with you today is my version of the 7 elements of career success that at least I think might be part of what constitutes a best job ever, or at least it's what constitutes a best job ever for me. So I'm going to start with the first element, which I have called integrity. And I want to share with you what I mean by that. So for me, it's finding work where what you're doing day to day is consistent with your deepest ideals, your deepest principles, your deepest values. And really more than consistent, the daily work you do should really advance those ideals and those values. It should ennoble you. It should encourage you to be a better person. And so I want to acknowledge that this is a really, really high aspiration. But from my conversations with many of you during the past few years, I can tell that you have some pretty lofty aspirations of wanting to make a difference in the world, wanting to have a real impact on people's lives, on institutions, on legal regimes. And over the past few years, and particularly in the last year and a half, I've seen so many of you do that kind of work here through your amazing and your inspiring activism on this campus, but also beyond the campus through your advocacy, your pursuit of change, your desire for reform. And that's incredibly exciting and incredibly inspiring for me to see, particularly because I spent many years here on the campus where there was really very little social justice advocacy or activism from the student body. So when I stand up here and I say that integrity means doing work that advances those ideals most of the time, every day, I realize that that's actually asking and expecting a lot. One thing I want to say, though, is despite its many shortcomings, and despite the way the law school's curriculum leaves much to be desired in terms of what we ought to be teaching here, I want to at least posit that in many ways, you've received a first-class education here. And even if you don't believe that or just disagree, I'm hoping we could at least stipulate that you'll be graduating with perhaps the best brand in the world on your CV. And so that means that you actually can find a job with integrity if you want to. And I think many of us can sell out too quickly to relatively convenient stories that can send us to workplaces where we're doing things that actually don't reflect our highest ideals or our highest values or our highest principles. If you have to weave a long and complicated story explaining why you're doing what you're doing, then maybe you're missing this element of job success. So I want to be clear here, right? I don't think there's any job where 100% of the time you're doing exactly what you want to be doing. But you do want your work to sing to you, and you do want the bulk of what you do to be really meaningful. So if your main satisfaction is from the 15% of pro bono that your firm allows, then I'm not sure you've actually achieved that kind of integrity. One of my mentors was Roger Fisher. He is one of the co-authors of Getting to Yes, and he also founded the program on negotiation here. And when he was still alive, when I was a student, sometimes if I had kind of a zany, implausible idea, I would kind of share it with him, but then tell him why I thought it was a little bit ridiculous. And he had this question. He would say, well, what if I paid you $1 million to do this? Could you do it then? And most of the time I'd say, yeah, for $1 million, I would definitely find a way to make that happen for $1 million. And then he'd say, OK, so then you can do it. You're just electing not to. And I'm not saying you should do it. I'm just saying you can do it if you want to. And so I'm pretty convinced that for most of you, you can find work that advances your deep ideals and values and principles. And so I would just encourage you to settle for no less. Because for me, as I return to that stone-cold dormitory room in East Jerusalem, where I had 4 hours to go before I had to teach another day, I could hardly believe that I get to do the work I do. Right? I could hardly believe that I had a chance to be in that place and to pass on the little bit of information that I knew around managing conflict in a context as profound as this one. And so I was literally pinching myself, even in my exhaustion. OK, second element I'm calling curiosity. And I'm actually an incredibly curious person. People who know me know that why is one of my favorite questions, followed closely by say more. In fact, for many years, my dream was to be a foreign correspondent for CBS News, just because I thought, like, that's what you get to do is go around and just ask people lots of questions. And so for me, curiosity is an element of career satisfaction, doing work in a field where there is more that is unknown than known. So for those of you who took negotiation with me, you know that I used this quote on the first day from former US Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld. And this came from a famous press conference that he had in 2002, where he said the following. He said, there are known knowns. There are things we know that we know. But then he said there are known unknowns. That is to say, there are things we now know we don't know. And then he said, there are also unknown unknowns. There are things we do not know we don't know. So I'm actually someone who's very drawn to the known and the unknown unknowns. And my field, this field of negotiation and dispute resolution, is a field that didn't exist as an academic discipline at all when I was born. So of course, people negotiated, but no one studied negotiation in any organized or disciplined way, and certainly no one taught it to anybody in a classroom in an organized or disciplined way. And so what we've learned over the past 30 years in this field is quite a lot. But what's interesting is that one of the things we've learned is that we actually know way less than we know about conflict and about human behavior and about how people make decisions. So mine is a field where there are many, many unexplored, cutting-edge directions in the field. Possibilities for empirical examination and possibilities for action science research. And so sometimes when I think about this, I get dizzy. I mean, and I'm serious, like I actually get dizzy. Like I get mad that I have to sleep, and I can't do all the things that I want to learn more about. Next year is going to be the 10th anniversary of the Negotiation and Mediation Clinic here. And when I first started teaching here, the world of negotiation more or less began and ended with the negotiation workshop. So for me, it's really exciting to think that we have a clinic, that we're doing work in conflict assessment and dispute systems design in fields that didn't even exist 20 years ago. And in the past few years, my own kind of intellectual interests have expanded, looking at areas around intrapersonal conflict and the world of identity and psychology and how that influences our across-the-table negotiations. And I see other domains in the worlds of neuroscience and mind science work that will affect profoundly what we do in my field going forward. So one of the really nice things about my job is that as soon as I get a little bit tired of what I'm doing, there's just more to move on to that's entirely new. So how does this apply to all of you? First, right, you are all necessarily curious people. I mean, if you weren't curious, you would not be here. But my guess is that you're also people who enjoy having right answers. You're people who like to know what you're talking about and to have some confidence about it. And in your professional lives, these two things will come into tension with each other. One of the things about my job is that there are domains where I can be expert. And to be honest, it's pretty inviting to stay right there. And in fact, I know lots and lots of people who make lots and lots of money basically giving more or less the same negotiation workshop most of the time in professional settings for years and years and years. And with no offense intended to them, conducting largely repetitive trainings would be deadly boring to me. So what makes me hum is that I can venture into domains where I know next to nothing or nothing. And then I could feed my curiosity. But there is a real cost to that, because it means people have questions, and I often don't have answers. And that surprises people sometimes, and it disappoints people a lot of the time. And it means that sometimes I'll discover a tentative answer, but I get more questions. And then I have wrong and misguided tentative answers. And that could be really uncomfortable, particularly when you're in a place where people want you to have an answer. So if I think about that time a few years ago when I was in East Jerusalem, and I'm thinking, like, I am in the context that is the context for conflict resolution people. And in the span of 2 days, I'm working with 18-year-olds, and I'm utterly and completely humbled by them. These are the most sophisticated, the most passionate, articulate, mature, gentle teenagers I've ever met. It's hard to even think that they're teenagers. And realizing, like, I don't know anything about this situation. Like, you can't learn this situation in a book. But what I do know, right, is I need to come back here. And I need to stay in touch with these people. And I need to think about how can I possibly translate some of this experience back into my own teaching and work when I come to Cambridge. So my encouragement to you is just to find work that really stimulates your curiosity. So it's really, really nice to be the world's expert in food law or IP or immigration. But it's really amazing to be an expert at asking questions. And it's really just full of adventure to be an expert challenging your assumptions and being curious. So I'm going to move on to element number 3, which I spent a lot of time thinking about what to call this, and I'm not entirely satisfied by this word that I've used, but there was a deadline. So I'm using the word striving, and I'm going to say what I mean by this, because I think it can sound a little bit similar to curiosity, but I mean something different here. So by striving, I mean choosing a craft where mastery is elusive. So where there's always room for improvement, where you'll always kind of have this passion to move, like from the A to the A+, or like in our terms, from the H to the DS. So curiosity, in my mind, is being in a field where there's more to learn about your field, But striving is really about your craft. It's about improving the how of what it is you're doing. So if you're doing work and you're thinking like, I'm really good at this, I like got it, right? I think then you're done. Like it's time to find something new. You want to be doing work where you feel like there's always some room to be better, where there's always room for improvement. And I think part of the reason why I walked into that dormitory room at 2:30 in the morning was because I had actually spent the 90 minutes before that with one of my colleagues debriefing everything that had happened from 7 a.m., like at a real micro level, even though we were exhausted. And that felt just exhilarating for me, because I love doing work and working with people who want to take their craft to the next level. So it's what keeps me on my toes, and it's what keeps things fun and alive for me. As a kid, when I was growing up, in response to telling my dad that I was nervous about either an upcoming performance or a class or a speech, my dad would always tell me that the day the Broadway actor or actress doesn't feel some butterflies in her stomach before she goes on stage for the performance was the day she should quit the production. And I really, really believe that. And yes, I am feeling some butterflies up here right now. So you could smile if you're still there with me. But when I teach with colleagues, I'll often ask them right before we begin, I'll be like, how are you feeling? And a lot of times they'll be like, oh, I'm feeling fine or feeling great. And then I'll say, oh, that's like, really? Because I'm petrified. Like, I'm incredibly nervous. Like, even this morning, I was like having a lot of ADHD, getting up and down. And lots of times they're surprised because they're like, you've been doing this for years. And for me, it's like, yes, and like I want to be as good as I can be, and I don't want to let whatever this audience is down today. So my advice is picking work where mastery is really elusive. Because I think if it just comes easy to you, you're selling yourself short. So some of you may have heard of or read a book by Jim Collins. It's called From Good to Great, Why Some Companies Make the Leap and Others Don't. And in this book, Collins has a really interesting, or at least interesting to me, quote. He writes, "Good is the enemy of great, and that is one of the key reasons why we have so little that becomes great. We don't have great schools principally because we have good schools. And we don't have great government principally because we have good government. Few people attain great lives in large part because it's just so easy to settle for a good life." So what I want to say is don't be content with good results. Seek out feedback, seek out coaching, seek out colleagues who will help you take whatever it is you are doing to a new level. So let me be clear about this, because I think this could be misunderstood, and I think if you misunderstand it, it could lead to a life of misery and unhappiness. Because I think there's a fine line between striving and being harsh with yourself and cruel with yourself and judging of yourself. So I suspect none of you had the pleasure of, none of you, I think, had the pleasure of having Justice Kagan as your dean, and probably few or none of you have had the pleasure of working with her. But when she was the dean, she was known for beginning her welcome speech to 1Ls by saying, "You have won." And there was something about that I really liked, and something about that I found really distasteful. So what I liked, right, was that it was a reminder that competition for competition's sake was really pointless and really unnecessary. And that at last, you could take a deep breath and just enjoy learning. And if you didn't learn to do that at Harvard Law School, it actually might be too late. What troubled me about it was a statement that could be misheard as, you could glide now, or striving for excellence doesn't matter because you made it. So there's a real tension between these two. And being gentle with yourself really matters. And also striving for excellence really matters. Because 18 years into teaching negotiation workshop, I still find myself changing and tweaking and modifying what I do. And I like to watch other colleagues teach, and I like to go to conferences because I want to learn what works and what doesn't work. Because I think it's really easy to be a good teacher, but it's really hard to be a great teacher. And I want to keep on trying, because someday I actually want to be a great teacher. So fourth element is element that I'm calling results. And I think for most of you, you are of the generation called Millennial. I am of the generation called X. And a few years ago, our clinic had a project, and the client wanted us to look at why organizationally there were huge conflicts coming up internally between people of the generation called Millennial and basically everybody else. So Xers, Boomers, I mean, I don't think there were too many of the greatest generations still in that workplace, but everybody else. And one of the themes, and it's a theme that you know, it's in the literature, right, is that Millennials can be impatient. Right? You want results, and you want to see them fast. You also want frequent appreciation and acknowledgement for the work that you do. You don't just want to be a cog in a gigantic, impersonal system that doesn't acknowledge your unique contributions. And so this is supposedly like the source of a lot of conflict, because apparently others in other generations were more willing to do the grunt work and be kind of part of the system. So here's a little secret for you that I can only speak to my own experience. But I would say that the Boomers and the greatest generation said the same thing of the Xers. And what I would say is, while taken to extremes, this impatience, this desire to see results can be bad. I actually want to say, like, the general notion that you should find work that produces tangible results, results that you can see and touch and feel and smell, actually seems great to me. So you should actually hold on to that. You should want to see and expect to see results. And you should want to and expect to feel appreciated and acknowledged for the contribution you're making to your work. During my first summer, I was lucky enough to split my summer, first summer after, law school, that is, split my summer between a law firm in DC and what at the time I thought would be my dream job, which is working at the Justice Department in the Civil Rights Division in the Educational Opportunity section. Like, if you said, like, well, what do you want to do? Like, that's what I wanted to do. And then at the end of the summer, I left strangely preferring the firm job over the DOD job. And so I was like thinking, you know, what went wrong here? And I realized, at least for me, and this is definitely very much for me, when I was at DOJ, I was working on desegregation cases that had been going on, many of them, since the 1970s. So at that point, it was like more than 25 years after they started. And many of the lawyers who started them were still working on them. And I just came away with this really distinct sense that, at least for me, in litigation, like, seeing tangible results was just painstakingly slow. And I think it's important for people to be able to see results in that, but, like, I couldn't, right? I needed to have, like, a palpable feel that I was making a difference, and I needed to see it in a tangible way sooner. So for me, going back to my training in East Jerusalem, teaching a bunch of active listening skills at 2 p.m., and then at 10 p.m., having people on their own just saying, we're going to practice this stuff instead of having a dance party, that was, like, exhilarating. And even now, tracking back, I'm in touch with some of the people on that workshop, seeing the way that that workshop changed some of their perspective and built some relationships that they never had before was mind-blowing. So I don't have any illusion that most people remember and apply, you know, most or maybe anything of what we teach. But I still have a palpable sense that overall the work produces results, and the results that I can see and I can feel, and that means a world to me. All of the research shows that the #1 reason why people leave their jobs is not because of pay, right? It's because they don't feel acknowledged and they don't feel appreciated for what they're doing. They can't see how their work is making a difference for them or for other people. So I think when you think about your careers, just insisting on a career where you can see results that really matter, where you get acknowledgement and appreciation from your peers, that is not something that you should feel bad about or feel ashamed of or feel like there's something wrong with you because you want that. Like, I actually think you should want that, and you should hold on to that. That really, really matters. OK, so all of this is not to say that this fifth element doesn't matter, right? This fifth element, which is money. And I realize this may surprise some people, and maybe I've framed it too crudely by just saying money and then putting a photo of like gobs and gobs of money up there. So I want to explain what I mean. Because I think except for those of us who are independently wealthy, right? If your dad is Michael Bloomberg or Bill Gates or something, except for that crowd, for the rest of us, a necessary purpose of our work will be to make a living. It will be to support ourselves, and for those of you who choose to, your family. So I think not including this element is a bit naive and a bit disingenuous. One of the things that makes my work best job ever is that actually it pays well enough. I mean, to be clear, unless you're wondering where your tuition dollars are going, right? I will never, ever, ever be rich as a clinical professor at Harvard Law School. And I'll never be rich. Having said that, right, I make like a decent enough living. I'll never make as much money as if I went to a law firm or if I were an outside negotiation consultant or started a business. But I make enough money that I don't have to stress about it on a daily basis. And that's actually nice, because I think if you're in a job where you have to constantly be worried about how to pay the bills or whether you could have a child or whether you'll be able to kind of move out of the garden apartment in Crown Heights or Bushwick and into a 2-bedroom in Williamsburg or Park Slope, right? It's really hard to imagine that your job is going to be sustaining for you. Because at some point, you're going to be looking at your friends who have just moved to the Upper East Side or to Greenwich or to Lake Forest or to McLean or to Los Altos, and you're going to get frustrated. And then you're going to throw in the towel, and you're going to make a decision primarily for money, and you will forget about the other 6 elements, right? It's like having like a venting session where you lose control and you blow up, and you do lots of really stupid things. And I've seen some of my public interest-oriented friends and some former students make this mistake in a moment of existential panic. And then what happens is they have a lot of money, and they really, really need to spend it because they need to stave off the general unhappiness and the general malaise that has become their life. So in my mind, money is up here mostly because it can become a distractor. Because if you're not making enough money to pay the bills, you'll feel a lot of stress and you'll feel a lot of heartache. But if you let money maximization get you, it's going to distract you from what brings you joy and really jazzes you. So let me be clear here, right? I think most of you are not going to frame this as, well, I just want to be rich, right? The way it's going to be framed for you, you'll say something like, the cost of living is too high, and it's really important to send Sasha to private school, and the tuitions are crazy, and then there's daycare and retirement, right? That's how you'll tell the story. And that might be true, but it might not be true. And so finding a job that lets you make a decent living can really be confused with finding a job that allows you to keep up with the Joneses, or with that kid in your 1L section who you really hated, or with your best friend from high school, or your kid brother, or perhaps very, very powerfully with your parents' expectations. So knowing the difference between the two really, really matters, and I don't think you need to be ashamed of the need for money, but you also don't need to be captive to it. Okay. One of my favorite elements, 6, is the element that I'm calling colleagues. So here's another really, really big secret, right? I have the best colleagues in the world. Here they are, right? And I have some of those colleagues sitting right there, and I have others of those colleagues sitting over there, right? Like best colleagues in the world. They're brilliant, they're hardworking, they're opinionated, they're caring, they're devoted. A few summers ago, yes, I should tell you, a few summers ago, all of my teaching assistants through the years, on their own, organized a weekend reunion for me, right? There they are, like that's up there. Like, it just came together, right? And this is the HNMCP team. And this is the our teaching team this year hasn't taken a photo yet, but that's the last teaching team that I was on. Oh, and this is your amazing and beloved classmate, Ariel Ekblad, who's my teaching assistant, who's sitting right over there, right? So, I realize, of course, I'm biased, but it doesn't matter, because what matters is that I feel inspired and encouraged and motivated and supported by my colleagues. And I think that will matter for you too. I mean, I have had the really, really great privilege of being able to choose many of my colleagues. I could select who the lecturers are and have some influence on who the teaching assistants are. And when I travel to do outside work, I can bring a person who I want to bring with me. And I can't tell you how many times I'm on a long-haul flight to, Hong Kong or Jerusalem or Calgary, sitting next to a colleague who's also a friend, thinking, I can't imagine how different this would be, and frankly, potentially, how horrible, if I were just forced to do this trip with someone who had been foisted upon me, a partner or a colleague that I didn't like. All of the kind of joy and fun and laughter would be dimmed, unless we happen to hit it off. Now, the reality, right, is that most of you, particularly at the beginning of your career, will not be able to just pick who your colleagues are. And I certainly couldn't, and I can't always still. But even when you can't, there are some things you can do to create a community of colleagues. So the first thing you could do is seek out mentors, people who are doing the type of work you want to do. But I would encourage you, don't just look for mentors who are doing the type of work you want to do. Look for people who seem to be the kind of people you would like to be. So for me, when I started teaching here, those people were Christine Desan, and Elizabeth Warren, and Bill Alford, and Janet Haley, and John Hanson, and Martha Minow when she was still just a professor here. So get to know those people and learn from their values and what they're doing, even if they're not doing your work. Typically, there are ways to create circles of colleagues whom you admire and whom you respect, even if there aren't institutionalized or formal ways to meet these people. So when I first started teaching here, I was 26. It wasn't so easy to connect with very many faculty. Now, to be clear, it's not so easy now either. But one of the things that I would do is just organize with some of the lecturers and teaching assistants and faculty who are interested on occasional Thursday nights. We would do Thursday nights at Temple Bar, right? Nothing formal. But it was a great way to create a community of colleagues that made a huge difference for me professionally and personally. And for whatever set of reasons, I didn't see a huge reason to make a distinction in my invitation between who is a professor and who is a TA and who is a research person. I just was like, these people seem like they would be fun to hang around with, and they could always say no if they don't want to. And it was a real source of richness for me. And so some of you are probably moving to cities or working in places where you may well feel alone, but just to remember that you're not helpless, right? If you can find or create forums for connecting and meeting other people. And I think if you do that, it's going to make your life and your career much happier. OK. Very last element. I have called love. And I think some of you might find this surprising, and maybe some of you might even actually disagree with it. But I feel quite strongly about it. So I think you should really think about choosing a career where there is a place for love. And when I say that, I don't mean choose a career that you love. I mean choose a career where there is a place for love. So in other words, choose a career where you could do something where love can live and move and have a real being, where love matters very deeply, where it can come out of the closet and stay there. And so that may sound corny, but I think for me what made a 16-hour day with 36 Israelis and Palestinians in East Jerusalem possible was not just willpower or a lot of energy drink or skills building or knowledge, right? But it was really witnessing and embracing the love that those kids had for each other and for their country and for doing something better in the world. So my work, the work of conflict resolution, does not work without love being in the mix. It just does not work. And so being able to name that in the room, to be able to feed and encourage that in the room, to say, yes, that this love you have matters and can make a difference and isn't misplaced, that's really amazing. And I can't imagine my work without that. Now, some of you may be saying, OK, Bob, it's easy to imagine a place for love and conflict resolution, but in law, really, in law? Right? So I want to say yes to that. And I suspect most of you, probably none of you, know Bill Stuntz. So Bill Stuntz was a very, very great Harvard Law School professor who died at a very, very early age in 2011 after a long and courageous battle with cancer. So really amazing guy. He taught criminal law here. In 2004, the graduating class selected him to win the Sachs Froring Teaching Award. And in my view, right, that is like the highest honor you could possibly get at this school because it comes from all of you, the people that we are here serving and teaching and hopefully learning from every single day. And so the big prize for this is that you get to actually address the graduating class for 5 minutes at class day. And Professor Stuntz delivered what I thought was like the most amazing class day speech ever. And so I wrote to him and said, would you mind sending that to me? Because I love it. And he did. And so he spoke to the role of love in law way better than I ever could. So I'm actually just going to read a piece of his speech. So he taught criminal law and just, I mean, as this says, lived an examined life of thoughtfulness and grace. So I'll read it to you. Not the speech, just an excerpt. Don't worry, just an excerpt. Okay. We are all tempted to treat law, both in law school and in law practice, as a mind game. All brain and no heart. I move my pawn and you move your bishop. I take your knight, you snatch my rook. But the knights and the bishops and the rooks, and most of all, the pawns, are people. People whose fortunes and whose very lives are in the hands of their lawyers. If we are going to do law right, we need to look at those lives, stare at them. What's needed is not just the assimilation of information or the assertion of proper legal claims, but empathy, humanity. We all want a humane legal system, but I think we sometimes forget that the largest part of humane is human. A humane legal system would look at the people it deals with as human beings, people with hearts and heads and lives and troubles. I think the biggest problem with our legal system is that much too often it sees the people it deals with as disembodied crimes, as torts or bank accounts, and not as human beings. If we are ever to fix that, if we are ever to get that right, we need lawyers with great minds. But we also need lawyers with great hearts. Think about my field. I teach and write about America's criminal justice system. And today, our criminal justice system is in the grip of a fetish for legal rules and legal rights. In the federal court system and in about a dozen states, criminal sentencing is done by grid. You look down column A and across row B, and you see how much prison time the defendant gets, as though sentencing were a high school algebra problem. But it's not an algebra problem. Rules and rights and grids and criminal histories don't do prison time. People do prison time. And those people have hearts. Any system that wants to treat those people justly must look at those hearts. And if we are to do that well, judges and prosecutors must use their hearts. Justice and efficiency and legal craft are very good things. It's good and right that you've spent 3 years learning about them. But they're incomplete. Justice needs mercy, efficiency needs empathy, and legal craft needs love. And if words like empathy and love don't sound like they belong on the same page with a phrase like legal craft, well, I think that may well be a sign that we've lost our bearings. So, end quote. And I would just modify that and say if words like empathy and love sound like they don't belong on the same page with wherever it is you choose to do, whether it's legal craft or running a startup or becoming a professor or running for office or leading an NGO, then I think that may be a sign that we've lost our bearings. So don't lose your bearings. Embrace love. I want to thank you for inviting me to speak with you today and for listening. I hope that when you return to Harvard Law School for your 5th reunion, you'll be able to regale me with your own stories of best job ever. Thanks.